What do Kurt Cobain, Janis Joplin, Elvis Presley, Lil Peep, and Mac Miller all have in common?
Well, they have all been killed by a
Global pandemic, and I'm not talking about COVID-19.
These
Celebrities perish
due to heroin or opioid prescription pill overdoses. When a celebrity overdoses, it is often seen as a tragedy, and we ask ourselves, why didn't we see the signs
and get them the help that they need.
needed? When it is your average everyday person, it is seen as another statistic or just another junkie off the street. And I'm asking you this, why don't we say those same things? How did we not see the signs or get them the help that they need when we probably did?
There are millions of Americans suffering due to this
Global pandemic every day. When I was younger, I used to watch
watch the show called Intervention and see
people struggle with substance abuse and saw how it tore their families and themselves apart. I used to think that this could never happen to me or someone in my family until the day that it did. Since then, I have understood that if it can happen to me, it can definitely happen to anyone, and it can even happen to you. And my brother, for the last 4 years,
has been suffering from heroin and
opioid abuse, and I've personally witnessed what it is like to see someone lose themselves to a substance.
from withdrawals, delusions, mood swings,
And relapse, I have practically
seen it all. In order to help and understand my brother, I needed to become an advocate for him.
as well as educate people about the current opioid crisis. After hearing my speech today, I hope you will join me in helping to end the stigma that is surrounding the opioid epidemic. Because ending the stigma is the key secret to getting people the help and treatment that they so desperately need. I'll be demonstrating this
In my speech
today when I talk about ways that
we're first talking about the background on what opioids are and who they are affecting, and then the ways that we can begin to save lives. And lastly, the effects that will occur if we do make
these changes. The opioid crisis is rampaging through the U.S., and millions of lives are currently at risk. But what exactly is
this drug that is putting so
many people in danger? Well, according to Galen Context from the document Opioid Crisis, these drugs stem from the opium poppy, and they are actually natural pain relievers that bind to the opiate receptors in your brain. They are sold for medical
use, often as painkillers
prescribed by medical practitioners.
Common examples of these drugs are hydrocodone, morphine, codeine,
Oxycontin, and fentanyl. The most common
illegal form of this drug, however, is heroin.
And these opioids produce really strong euphoric effects, which is what makes them so easily abused and highly addictive. According to the CDC in 2017, it only takes 5 days of using this drug to create a dependence.
An example of this extreme dependence
is highlighted in the story of Travis Ryder. In a TEDx speech, he describes his experience with opioid prescription pills after he almost lost his foot in a motorcycle accident. After 2 months of his prescription increasing, a doctor finally warned him that he will need to slowly wean himself off of his medications. This was the first time that someone had expressed the severity of these medication that he had been taking as a form of therapy. When he slowly weaned himself off, he experienced extreme withdrawals. His symptoms included fever, chills, and nausea, and even mental health issues like severe depression and suicidal thoughts. This is coming from someone who had no prior history with addiction.
And he had no idea of the consequences about the pills that he was
putting into his body. As devastating as it sounds, stories like Travis Ryder, he's not an outlier. They're actually very common in our country. In the 1990s, pharmaceutical companies developed new formulas for these modern painkillers and advertised them as abuse-resistant and safe to healthcare providers. The result of these being an extreme overprescription of opioids to millions of Americans. And we are now seeing those repercussions today in our society. According to the CDC annual surveillance, 10.3 million people aged 12 and above have reported misusing opioids. With the prescription pills regulations tightening, there has been a skyrocketing in black market transactions as well as illegal synthetic opioid use. So, according to the CDC, in the years of 2010 between 2016, the number of fatal heroin overdoses in the U.S. Tripled. This nationwide pandemic is affecting all of us. According to the American Psychiatric Association National Poll, in 2018, 1 in 3 people know someone who is suffering with an addiction, and I am one of those 3 people. The face of the pandemic does not discriminate. Many of these drugs are affecting users like Travis Ryder, who began as average Americans prescribed these without proper guidance. But the other horrific truth is that this pandemic is targeting people who are struggling with mental health disorders. So, in a paper by the Drug and Alcohol Dependence, Volume 77, Issue 3, there was a group of 650 people who were dependent on heroin, and they reported that 92% of them had suffered some form of trauma in their lifetime, and 41% of them were currently suffering from PTSD. So families everywhere are struggling to keep their loved ones safe, but it's even more heartbreaking to find out that some of them never even had a choice in this matter to begin with. A statistic coming from our own backyard, the Ventura County Medical Center, has estimated that 1 in 50 babies will be born with opioid exposure. In the fall of 2020, my niece or nephew will be a part of this disturbing demographic, and I'll have to witness what it is like for a child to be born addicted to opioids. So how can we as a society begin to start saving lives? Well, as of this moment, there are effective treatments for people who are suffering from this addiction. According to Dr. Jennifer Potter, a national expert in opioid use disorder, there are 3 FDA-regulated medications currently on the market called methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone, and the results seem to be promising. In a clinical trial using buprenorphine, they have seen symptom remission as well as recovery in up to 3 months. So we have these medical treatments and therapies that are necessary to help these people on their road to recovery. However, we are still facing major roadblocks. These treatments exist, yet they are barely accessible. Getting into one of these programs can be a lengthy process. Waitlists can be up to months or even years, and they are not accessible for the people who need them the most right now. The second being that they are not affordable. Many of these programs are not covered by insurance if we are assuming that someone even has medical insurance, which means that they must be paid out of pocket. So this is where our call comes to action. As a society, the most powerful tool that we have is our voice. Yet we are not using it because we are too afraid of facing our current roadblock. In order to end this crisis and stand up, we must first challenge our own stigmas against addiction. Addiction is not a choice, it is a disease. The director of the CDC once stated that stigma is the enemy of public health. The moment we change the narrative surrounding the opioid addiction is when we can begin to make a real change. Having compassion for people who are suffering from this disease is the only way to become advocates. If we treated addiction like cancer, diabetes, or any other disease, we would have more funding for research for new treatments, would call our legislators and see how they can make these programs affordable and accessible for people, and we would put an end to doctors overprescribing these medications. However, we cannot be this support system because we aren't acknowledging our prejudice and judgment that we have in our society. If you have never seen someone personally suffer, it is easy to write it off as not being your problem. And it's also easy to say, if you've never seen someone struggle from substance abuse, why they can't just stop using drugs. If this was the case, then millions of people would not be suffering. In fact, according to the American Addiction Centers, quitting cold turkey can have withdrawal symptoms that are almost unbearable and can even cause sudden relapse overdose. Ending the stigma is the number one way that we can begin the chain of events that will get millions of Americans the help and treatment that they deserve. In conclusion, I have talked about
the opioid crisis and what it is
and how it is affecting our society. I have also talked about the
ways that we can help addicts get the treatment
they deserve by ending the stigma against this addiction. And lastly, I discussed the
effects if we were to make those
changes and the repercussions if we were to remain in our prejudice habits. This battle to
humanize this addiction
is one that cannot be fought alone. I encourage you all to join me at shatterproof.org,
and becoming a community ambassador,
where you can share your experience and begin to advocate for change in your own community. If you want to help families like mine reunite and save their loved ones, then you will speak up today. Thank you.